Madam Chair, interesting hearing. As I go through my questions, first of all, whoever feels most qualified to answer, just chime in, because I'm not quite sure who I should really be asking these things of. I'm coming at this from a perspective of a private sector guy who's gone through a lot of financial statement audits as well as ISO quality system surveillance audits. A lot of the issues we're discussing here are the same issues involved in the private sector in terms of an independent auditor that if he just comes into a business or an agency cold, has got a lot to learn and can also miss a lot because they're not knowledgeable, versus somebody who's been with an agency or a company, an auditor long-term, that really knows the business and can spot things more quickly, but has the potential of then, whether it's called auditor capture or inspector general capture, but really loses some independence. So I think that's really the difficult issue we're talking about here. Let me start out by asking, within the agencies, what is automatic in terms of inspections or audits every year?
Well, there are a number of audits that are required by law. The ones that come to mind are the financial statement audit, the FSMA audit, and there are some other audits that we have to do, IPERA for improper payments, those sorts of things. So,
which of those are contracted with an outside auditing firm versus done by the Inspector General's office?
Right. So I think, well, I'll only answer for myself, and I think it has to do with scale, and there's philosophy. For example, we do the financial statement audit of USAID in-house. We contract it out for the other 4 organizations because they're smaller organizations, and they sort of, well, the 2 corporations and the 2 foundations have more of a corporate structure that you're familiar with, so we use outside audit firms that we supervise. But with AID, since we're the indigenous IG, we do that work ourselves. Where we need technical expertise for FSMA, for example, we'll contract that out to do penetration testing and that sort of thing. But again, we supervise that ourselves. But generally, we prefer to do all of the audit work ourselves in-house.
So what is the trade-off, and how do you guard against that trade-off in terms of being familiar with the agency, familiar with what part you're auditing, versus really being independent? I know you've got auditing standards, that type of thing, but in terms of just basic reality of the situation, that's a really difficult problem, isn't it? And how do you deal with that?
Maybe I'm misunderstanding your question, Senator, but I think by virtue of the fact that the statutory IG or the federally designated IG is the one doing the work, there's no question of independence there. We understand the systems, we understand the vulnerabilities, we understand the business model, and I think that's a benefit rather than a disadvantage. And I would say, in the corporate world, the for-profit audit industry is exactly that, for-profit. And I would say we're more independent than for-profit audit organizations on the outside that are looking for the work the next year. Now, I'm not saying that they would do anything different than we would do, but we're completely independent, and I think that's a strength rather than a weakness.
Well, I'll agree with Ms. Gustafson. It really does depend on the individuals. We certainly saw within the OIG's office within DHS, we've had some real questions in terms of independence, and I think that was because of an individual, not necessarily the act. But again, you're dealing with people, both in the agencies and the IG's office. So I think it's a serious concern in terms of how do you maintain that type of independence. In terms of the consolidation, I see a real problem if you just take an OIG for a particular agency and then provide other smaller agencies that IG is going to have to provide those inspections for. What type of attention are they going to get? Just speak to that issue. I think, from my standpoint, it almost seems better to have completely independent OIGs for 5 different agencies, rather than have one associated with one agency and then offload, 4 additional agencies to that one. Because again, I just think they're going to have far less attention. And so can you speak to that problem?
Well, in our situation, the bill talks about, the draft bill talks about OPIC, and OPIC fits very well what we do already, and that's what IG Carroll was mentioning before. It's the same type of transactions that we're looking into. One is the investment side, which is political risk insurance. but they all go into the same process of underwriting. So for us, we already have the infrastructure to take over OPIC, and it will be an easy match. Now, there was a discussions a few years ago on the House side to bring also, I think it was USTDA under us. That was a little different. It's all grants. We don't do grants. And so it's even though it's trade, it's grants. So USAID might be better equipped to handle that. And so those are the challenges that we have. And to add to the OPIC thing, the discussions I had a year ago, 2 years ago on the House side, they were talking about only on the audit component, and only for a period of time, for 2 years, 3 years. And we didn't think that was effective. I think we need full authorities on the G Act, because many times, and it happens to us on Exim Bank, you're looking at a transaction, do an audit, and you find fraud. And so we equip right on the spot to investigate it.
Well, let me go to that, because it's been said that it's important that the missions be similar. I want to just really probe that a little bit. I mean, a financial transaction is a financial transaction, no matter what type of agency. Fraud is fraud. There's certain auditing standards, there's a process going through. I mean, how important is it that the IGs are assigned to agencies with similar missions when you're talking about financial transactions that are, common between different agencies, no matter what their agency mission is?
I think from our perspective, we're looking at, for example, how the project finance deals are structured overseas, right? It's a little bit different than a financial transaction from the government perspective. It's a little more commercial in nature. That's what OPIC does too. That's what we do. That's what multilaterals do. World Bank, MIGA, IDB. And so that's a different component. Now, when we're talking about financial statement audits, very similar components. So you can see skill sets that you can transfer across agencies. Performing audits, that's Yellow Book. We can do that across agencies. But there's certain components, a certain level of sophistication of the transactions involved in some agencies that I think the expertise or the knowledge of at least the basics of a transaction can really save you a year or two of learning how it works.
Okay, my time's run out. Anybody want to chime in just on the questions I
Just back
asked?
to your first question, Senator. I guess as a smaller IG, I recommend individual IGs, as you were talking about, for each agency. I think the presence and the knowledge that you gain with that agency cannot be substituted by a part-time IG from another IG office, particularly a large IG office. My 30 years in the larger IGs, I recognize that we assigned and put highest priority on highest priority projects and risks that the agency had. And it's just human nature. We're not going to put our best staff on a $1 million or $2 million entity. So I think a separate IG where the budget and the sensitivity of the program is well worthwhile. With respect to the consolidation, what I was talking about is very small agencies that have similar things. When I talked about 6 economic development commissions, we do exactly the same thing. And maybe there, one IG knows grants. I have a counsel for, legal counsel for, as Chairman Pascal said, we have some challenges. Some of us have to get legal counsel, investigative help. And we generally have agreements with an IG that has similar responsibilities as we have if we're going to conduct a fraud investigation or get some legal opinions. So I think I agree with you that if possible, I don't think it costs any more to have the separate IG, even though it's a small staff, but on-site presence and knowledge of that agency, as opposed to farming it out to another agency who may or may not have targeted staff put on that oversight and may not have the priority that they would have for their regular programs. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.